Video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about the item changes and give my first few impressions, what I think are good things about the changes to the system, and what I think are maybe some pitfalls that Riot might fall into with the new item system. Now, I know I talked generally about what all of the items did and how they could be used in my previous video, and so I'm not going to bother talking at a long period of time about specific items. Instead, I want to talk about the system in general and kind of where I feel that system is going to be at, especially when the system finally goes live, and especially when we have the chance to actually play with it. Now, first and foremost, I know I'm going to sound really negative. A lot of it is going to be because things are new, and new things are always scary, and there can be a lot of possible problems with the system that I can already kind of see setting up. So if I do sound excessively negative, it's not that I think the new system is bad. I think that there's a lot of good things that it does, but there is potential for the system to potentially be abusable. So I do want to at least clear that up right away. So if it does sound like I'm really talking crap about the new system, that you guys understand that it's not because I hate it, it's because generally I'm just worried about where exactly it's going to end up. Now, first and foremost, let's go ahead and start with some of those pros. First, I really like the new item system because it's going to give better builds from game to game. I feel like a lot of times in the current item system, you sort of kind of build the same things every single game on certain champions, especially. Most AD carries are going to go with the Infinity Edge or Essence Reaver first, and that decision is sort of made for them. There isn't a thought of which is better for the game. You just build that first. A lot of bruisers, the question is, do you go Trinity Force or Black Cleaver? And you essentially build that almost every single game. I feel like there are very few champions that do want to flex whichever item they're starting first, especially topside. It feels like either you can abuse on hits, and therefore you're going to go Blade of the Rune King or Trinity Force, or you can't, and therefore you're going to go Cleaver or Trinity Force. But either way, one of those items is going to get built on your character. The new system, I think, addresses those particular problems by giving significantly more options to characters, and especially giving options to champions based on game context as opposed to just what that champion necessarily wants. A good example of this are the Marksman Mythics, which I do think generally are less flexible than some of the others, but I do like where they're at in that you can kind of say, yeah, there are a lot of assassins in this game. I kind of don't want to go with my Kraken Slayer because even if I do a ton of damage with Kraken Slayer, I just will not survive the Rengar jumping on me, the Talon jumping on me, the Rost coming out of the wall and murdering me instantly. So I'm going to go Shield Bow instead. That's sort of a flexible choice I can go with and I can take that is maybe a little bit better for the situation at hand rather than just plowing ahead with my usual build. And sort of a side effect of that is it's a little bit easier for marksmen especially to itemize defensively. A lot of their defensive items still give them critical strike chance, so even if they're champions that really need crit like Tristana and it feels really bad to have to throw a Guardian Angel or a QSS into your build early on, you're not sacrificing crit, so you can kind of finish that item and not feel too bad about it, not feel like I had to set myself back 1300 gold for the QSS just in case the Malzahar roams and I get ulted and die instantly. That sort of a thing. I do like how that's sort of a flexible option. Mages as well have the option of saying, yeah, the enemy team has a lot of tanks, instead of having to get my mana item, get my AP item, and then throw a Liandry's Torment into the build. And even then at some point, the Liandry's Torment isn't ideal on certain champions. For example, Syndra, who's like a burst mage and just doesn't really care about the stats it offers. It still feels a little bit better being able to, in this setup, build it first, have that penetration, have that shred, have that bonus health damage, and be able to plow ahead with the rest of your build from there, knowing that at least you have some way of fighting back against tanks. I do think that's really good. And now, there are going to be certain champions and certain classes that essentially have an item that they build every single game. And that's fine. I think that for a lot of champions, that's okay to have, especially enchanters. I think for the most part are going to be building the, I don't even remember the name of it now, but the healing item that gives you the healing while you're in combat and increases that every time you proc it while you're in combat. Like most enchanters are just going to buy that first. I don't think they have there are a lot of enchanter mythics that make sense for those champions. But either way, the system being able to give you the option of flexing around, especially for certain classes that tend to have less solved build paths, is still a good thing because that way you have the option of getting your build where you actually want it, and it makes itemizing a little bit more of a skill check and less of a, well, did you look up a build on Mobifier or op.gg or pro builds or what have you. You're not just saying, okay, what does this champion build in every single game? Instead, you're saying what makes sense for the context. Sort of along the same lines, I really like how Riot have cleaned up a lot of the degenerate or hard-to-parse items that exist in the system. I think a lot of things like Stoneplate gaining a shield instead of granting damage reduction, Death Stance becoming a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more obvious about where it should be built, Steric's Gauge making it more obvious that this is a team-fighting anti-burst item. Like, all of these are excellent changes that make it obvious where this item is supposed to excel and who it is supposed to be built on. Steric's Gauge says you should be getting hit by 5 champions for maximum value. Same with Stoneplate. You should be getting hit by 5 champions to maximize the value on this. And it solves some of the degeneracy that these items could provide before. There's, like I said before in my previous video, there's no more going to be a Cho'Gath using a stone plate and one-shotting a squishy from full because he just doubled his health bar and his ult scales off of health. There's going to be less carries buying Steric's Gauge or Death Stance because they don't get as much value out of it. Those are no longer items that kind of say they're just generically good defense and force these items to be melee only in order to prevent the ranged champions, especially AD carries, from abusing them. Now it's a lot harder for AD carries to justify building them. In fact, I don't think they actually will ever build Death Stance or Steric's Gauge after the changes. It feels like a lot of the fighter itemization is actually quite bad on Marksman nowadays because it is more specifically for the characters that were always supposed to be building it. So I do quite like where those changes are at. And across the board, there are a lot of changes like that. Even if you think about how the jungle items work, that in and of itself is a streamlined process. There's no more build your jungle item, finish your jungle item, and then you can start building whatever item you want next. Instead, it's get your jungle item first, and then just start building whatever item you want, because your jungle item will take care of itself. So that is quite nice. However, this does sort of lead me into the cons section, and especially for the problems, which is that there aren't any more easy build paths. And I know I just said, that's a good thing, you should be thinking about your build path, but what it does hurt is newer players, or players that don't play League of Legends very often, or aren't as competitive with it. If you're a very casual League of Legends player, you probably have a cookie-cutter build that you do in every game, just because you don't care about it that much. You don't want to think about it, you don't want to take your time and be like, oh, okay, really, what do I want to build? You just kind of want to queue up, pick a champion, build items on them, and have fun with the game. For a lot of casual players especially, the game is about the champion versus champion combat and less about things like rotations or build paths or farming. So for those players, the changes to the item system are quite disappointing, because you are sort of having to flex your build path around, and it does feel like the recommendations, I don't know how that system is going to work quite yet, but it does feel like that system has the potential to just fall flat on its face, not really tell players exactly what could work. We already have problems with the recommended items nowadays, not giving players good options, or essentially saying, yeah, you could build these items, but maybe they're not the greatest thing in the world. If a new build got discovered, maybe you're still building the old stuff, and Riot haven't bothered to update it. The recommended items could fall into the same kind of trap where it says, oh yeah, sure, no, build this item, it's a good idea, trust me, when in reality it may not be. So in general, I feel like there's a lot of possibility for the system to not go great. The other problem I have is that you have to buy your mythic item first because of how it affects the rest of your build and the extra stats it grants per completed item. Just in general, that leaves a lot of champions sort of high and dry, especially if you were used to building a certain item first. I think the biggest thing this hurts are AD bruisers. I feel like they really don't have an item in particular that they want to build first. It kind of feels like, are you a Trinity Force character, at which point you still kind of build Trinity Force, you're probably still fine with it. But a lot of Juggernauts, especially like Cleaver first carries like Darius or Kled, they don't have a great option despite having more mythics than every other class, which sounds weird, I know, but they don't have an item that feels like, yes, build this first. A lot of it is sort of, well, maybe I could build that, but that's a lot of attack speed that I don't care about or need. Maybe I could build this other item, but again, you know, I don't necessarily need it in this game because the comp's not that mobile. There's just a lot of options that, while sure, you could build this, it's not like a, yes, I want this. And it feels similar to the situation AD Bruisers found themselves in when Runes Reforged came out and they didn't have access to Conqueror yet. Yeah, you could go press the attack, you could go phase rush, you could go grasp the Undying, but none of them felt like a Bruiser-focused Keystone rune. And it wasn't until Conqueror was invented that they had something they could say, yes, this feels good. And it feels like AD Bruisers are sort of back in that spot. Now, there will be some champions, especially Fiora, Irelia, a lot of these sort of light fighters, they're, I think, perfectly served by the new item system. I don't think they care at all, but a lot of the sort of heavier fighters, I feel like, don't have a great item now that they're not going to be building Cleaver as the first item, Tiamat as the first item. Generally, it feels like they're a little bit left in the lurch. Another problem are hybrid champions. Katarina, Akali, and Kayle are all kind of in the lurch as well without Gunblade. They just don't have a great option that says, yeah, build this first because this gives you all the stats you want. It gives you a good passive that kind of lets you sustain a little bit more. Those options don't really exist, so and that's why they are getting a bunch of buffs on PvE, especially Katarina being able to proc on hits with her basically all of her abilities, I guess. But that essentially feels like the kind of change you make on Katarina because you know she's not served with Gunblade. She's not going to be getting that first up. So, I don't know. It feels like there are a lot of problems with the item system for champions that don't quite have options yet. Now, I'm aware a lot of these holes will probably get filled when the item system goes live. Riot will get more data and more information about the new item system on day one than they will have gotten in the entire time they have been playing with items behind the scenes, and probably from the entire time the items have been on PvE. They will get more data day one from then all of that time put together. So those holes will hopefully be addressed, but for right now, the system, I think that is a problem I have with it. There also is still potential for abuse with the new system. It looks okay. There are certain items, though, that kind of give me cause for concern. Eclipse, I know, is one that Riot already have on their watch list because of how easy it is to proc that bonus movement speed and shield. Kama, a ranged Tiamat. There's a reason Tiamat is a melee-only item. I know Kayle was actually a champion that broke that item way, way back in the day when it could be procced at range. So, in general, the fact that it can be built on ranged again means that there is potential for problems with that item. Navori Quickblade giving you essentially the Sterix Gate or the Spear of Shojin passive again. There are a lot of places where the item system could be abused. Again, I know Riot will be watching, but especially with all that's going to be changing on this update, the game is going to be in a really wonky state, I feel like, for a long period of time. Another couple just minor things that I wanted to just mention. Better access to Grievous Wounds is going to hurt certain champions like Aatrox and Dr. Mundo, so I do feel like Riot are going to need to either buff these champions or at least make sure the gold on the Grievous Wound items is in a better spot, so it's not just kind of like, oh, this is the first item you build guaranteed. It does feel like you want to make sure that's in a better spot. I feel like fewer actives is, again, good for the newer or less hardcore players, like I talked about before, but it does mean that certain effects are going to be more abusable. Blade of the Ruined King springs to mind, where that used to be a very powerful active that you had to think twice about using, like when is it a good time to use this ability? It wasn't just something you got for existing, whereas now it's 20 seconds. All I have to do is hit the guy 3 times, and I get a nerfed version of the old Blade of the Ruined King, but effectively I can get that every 20 seconds, which is significantly more procs of a Blade of the Ruined King-esque effect in its normal cooldown period of time. Also, AD Rylai's, that's a thing. That could be really silly on champions like Garen. I'm sort of excited to see how it goes, but that there is potential for abuse there. I think that does fall into the sort of abuse category. And Phantom Hit still exists. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's still abusable. It does prevent dipping into crit for like Infinity Edge and Shiv Burst, like Vayne, for example, but it does still exist as a stat, and I am not a fan of that item in general. But in general, I think the item system has done a bunch of good already. I feel like there is potential for this item system to be better than the current item system. There are some kinks I think that still need to be ironed out, and it could turn out that a lot of my fears are completely unfounded, but we'll have to wait and see as to when these changes go live and we can actually sort of evaluate them on their own merit. But that's going to be it for me, guys. Let me know what you think of all these item changes down in the comments below, especially if you've had a chance to play with them on PvE. Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear if you guys are thinking, no, the item system's totally fine, or if you guys are like, wow, this is completely broken. Let me know down in the comments. Would love to hear it. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.